My name is Zann Campbell-Johannes. I am the technical director here at Toledo School for the Arts. And every fall, along with the students that I teach and some volunteers, I am tasked with designing and building the sets for our fall musical, which this year is The Addams Family. Typically, I start by obviously reading the show. I read it a number of times through. The first time just to get an idea for it, but then I start looking for themes within the play or with the music or how the different characters interact with each other. And sometimes that comes across as a large artistic concept. Way back when we did Oliver, like 9 years ago at this point, it was kind of a steampunk feel. There was a lot of industrialization to it. So sometimes it's very artistic like that. Other times it's more about the time period, which is what we did for Anastasia last year. It was a little bit more about the setting than anything else. This year it's about this kind of like cartoony, playful, whimsical darkness that is the Addams Family. So the visual portions of that all come from the thematic ideas that we see within the show. Amelia Lefevre and I tend to meet up a couple of times to talk about design concepts. We talk about the process by which we want to kind of create this entire show. Themes from the musical, or maybe different elements that we want to pull in. It's always very challenging because there's so many students that are involved that the sets always end up being quite massive. Usually I will pitch ideas in terms of, oh, I have this piece that we could reuse, or I can build this and it will look in this way. Amelia and I can really hone in on what it is we're looking for and be on the same page moving forward about what it looks like and how it's going to be used. I usually just offer my expertise in what is capable in terms of the set build. Do we have the budget and the time and the materials to make these particular shows happen? It's kind of a combination of drawing and planning and having things in my mind and letting it come as it kind of moves along. The big portions of things I really have to plan out because those are the ones that absolutely have to be correct. Some of the smaller pieces, though, I'm able to kind of figure it out as I go. I typically start by figuring out all of the set pieces that I need. I actually have a to-do list on my whiteboard over there that is just every piece and then kind of broken down what it is I need to accomplish with that, just for a general idea of what's going to be the most complex, what do I need to spend the most time on. And then from there, I tend to individually design those pieces. Some of the more complex ones, I built these walls for a Central Park scene. And I had to plan those out because I'm like, all right, they need to be this tall and this wide and need to have this much weight on them. So I did draw out plans for those and have the basic idea of how that was all going to fit together with measurements and exact details. Some other things can be a little more freeform. We have the moon that Fester falls in love with, and I just built that as we went. I had an idea of what I wanted it to be and a general goal with how I wanted it to look, and me and some of my students just kind of made it happen over the course of a couple of hours last week. In terms of what is actually put on stage, often comes down to what we need for the blocking, for the students moving around, for the ability for all of the different characters to be seen and be heard at these particular times. This one, like most of the musicals, has a very large cast, and most of them are these ancestor characters that are constantly moving around and causing havoc in the background. So we want to be able to see them a lot. So we have this big, tall platform that curves around the side and a grand staircase going up the front where Gomez and Morticia and Lurch can have their giant big moments. As much as possible, I try to make sure that the set is able to be moved and maneuvered in a way that is going to allow students and volunteers to help make that happen. There are definitely pieces we have that are very heavy. The steel frame structures that I was talking about previously are very hefty and do take a number of people to move around and put up and put together. But more than that, I try to make sure that everything is in its individual components. So we have platforms, and the platform itself is put together, but the legs that are underneath are separate. We'll put those together once we get there. The stairs are all in multiple pieces so that they aren't unwieldy. We can carry them in with the stringers and then the tread that you step on, and all in individual pieces to make sure that everything can then start fitting together. The weight of some of the larger pieces actually ends up being a good thing once we get there, because as it's heavier, it stays in place and doesn't want to move anymore, which is really great once we get it together, of course. The issue is trying to make sure that those pieces are going to be able to be handled by my students, who are not necessarily, you know, weightlifters. The pieces that do move, I tend to try and make as light as possible, either with lightweight materials or making it just a frame that can be easily pushed around. Sometimes we actually end up adding weight to some of them. The walls that I made, these brick walls for Central Park, are actually a little bit front heavy. We're gonna have to add some stage weights to the back of them so they don't tip over and move. There's actually enough heft to them to be able to stand up and be utilized the way they're supposed to be. Of course, because students are moving these, I want to make sure that they're as easily maneuvered as possible. So they're always going to have wheels on them whenever possible, brakes to make sure that they stay in place once they reach their potential spot on stage, and then making sure that everything is going to fit and be kind of like Tetrised backstage. The things that fly overhead, I'm very careful about weight with. Because it's a very carefully balanced system. So I don't want it to be so heavy that we have to put a whole bunch of weight on that particular line to offset it, but I don't want it to be so light that we don't have the ability to actually give it the balance that we need. So it's an interesting game of saying, I don't want it to be too light, but I don't want it to be too heavy. The planning of it all can be a little complex sometimes, because we're building all of these elements here within the shop, and we have to then move everything over to Owens Community College where we do the production. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and I've gotten very good at over the years of making sure that everything is going to fit together when we arrive. It's a lot of math, a lot of fitting pieces and parts in the right way to make the puzzle all come together once we get there. So after we've finished building most of the individual pieces and components, we load them onto a truck, get that over to Owens, and unload everything and start putting it all together. There are some things that I will leave until we get there because they're just too big or too complex to try and build here in this space. But for the most part, I try to make sure that all of those individual pieces are ready to go and come together once we get into that space. It's also important to keep in mind, like I said, how everything is going to fit together, because as those pieces start moving and connecting, you want to make sure that everything is solid and safe and ready to go. There have, thankfully not under my watch here, but at other schools there have been accidents, and it's my top priority to make sure that no one feels unsafe on any of my sets. The main portion of these large sets for the musicals for the past couple of years have been these large steel frame structures. That's been the middle base of a lot of them. And building off of that becomes very sturdy once everything is in place. And then stairs that are built out, honestly, probably more past code than you would have in your house, just to make sure that it's not just people going up and down, but you know, dancers stomping up and down and people jumping and moving and all sorts of things happening on there with, you know, dozens of kids at a time trying to move up and down those things. So making sure that all of these pieces are going to be stable and safe and secure once we get there is a whole nother facet of making sure just that oh yeah, they fit together, or yes, it looks good, it's also safe and okay to use. I lean on my students pretty heavily to help with the building and creating of these particular elements. Depending on the show, sometimes I'm asking them to help me with the actual design process. Other times I come to them with plans and I'm asking them to work on the build and in a more collaborative project kind of way. My advanced students especially really pull their weight when it comes to working on the builds. I have a number of students who are here almost every day after school working with me. They come over on the weekends, and we continue to spend long hours making these things happen. My then intro students and my junior high students have a chance to work side by side with people who are a little bit more experienced, and they kind of learn almost through a mentorship kind of program. Not anything specifically designated in that way, but just working with other people who are more experienced than them creates this learning environment where people are helping each other through things. When it comes to working on the show, that's the same kind of setup I give my students with area professionals. So for the musical, most of the design elements are done by adults. So myself for set, usually we have Rick Clever doing lighting, various people doing sound, various people doing props within the production team. Casey Koenig usually does the costumes. And having my students work with those professionals gives them the opportunity to see the adults doing what they're supposed to be doing and start to learn that process very, very well. And they do a great job at learning hands-on on the job, making sure that all of those things are taken care of, and they pick up on things very, very quickly. So I lean on them very heavily, sometimes in a very kind of let's just get going kind of way, rather than a let me teach you exactly how things happen. That usually happens in class, but in the after school and weekend and during the shows itself, I try to make it as hands-on and as project-based as possible. I think my favorite part of the entire process is the creative collaboration that happens. This isn't just me doing my thing in a vacuum. It is an entire team of people coming together to make something absolutely awesome. So when I'm creating my work, there's someone else creating theirs, and then they come together and complement each other and work together to create this thing that wasn't just a few weeks ago. I have a very big creative drive to make and build and have these ideas that will fully encompass the themes of the show. And I'm incredibly lucky to work with other professionals who have the exact same initiative to make that happen. And I love working with the people that I work with. It's that collaboration that really drives me.